This is TC Daily, the new technology show brought to you by TechCentral. I'm Duncan McLeod. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. Visit youtube.com/TechCentral. Hit the subscribe button and the bell icon, and you'll never miss an episode. You can also get the latest tech news and views on techcentral.co.za. Get our daily newsletter at techcentral.co.za/newsletter, and you'll get the latest local, international news delivered to your inbox every morning at 5 a.m. Now, I'm joined today on TC Daily by no stranger to TechCentral, a former tech journalist turned entrepreneur and now published author, Simon Dingle. It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. And you, Duncan. Nice to see you again, too.
Yeah, last time we chatted was around the launch of your book, Beyond Bitcoin. Are you working on any new books?
Not in practice. There've been a few ideas, in my mind, but no, nothing that's concrete yet.
Right. I must say I really enjoyed Beyond Bitcoin. When we spoke, I think I'd got about a third or halfway through the book, as these things happen, rushing to read them before an interview. But I finally finished it. Enjoyed the audible version of the book. It was very well narrated, I must say.
Yeah, we were lucky with the artist, I suppose is the correct way to put it, that narrated the book for us. And I'm impressed you actually read it. I think 99% of the people who interviewed us about the book had only seen the title.
Well, it's actually a fascinating subject. How have sales gone?
I don't know really. So we were published through Icon in the UK, and they haven't shared sales figures with us yet. I'm told it's going well. There were also foreign language rights sold for a number of languages, including Korean and Arabic, and I think those are on shelves now. But I haven't been exposed to the sales figures, so who knows?
Right. You co-wrote that book, of course, with Stephen Sidley, and if anyone's interested in learning more, you can go back and have a listen to that podcast, which we did. When was it? About 6 months ago now.
Yeah, it must have been.
Must have been about that. Yeah. So, what are you up to these days, Simon? What's keeping you busy and out of trouble?
Well, before starting my own business or businesses, I was involved with Curve in the UK. And after that, sort of went on an adventure to decide what to do next. And that's culminated in a few projects. And the ones that are keeping me most busy at the moment are ZARP, which is our stablecoin project for the South African rand, and our other business, Venox, which is a digital asset investment platform. So just taking sort of what I'd learned and was thinking about from the world of fintech and blockchain, and really applying that to some projects that are grand experiments for now, but are, I suppose, a manifestation of where I see this all going, and time will tell how accurately.
We're going to talk a bit about where it's all going in this podcast today, and you mentioned ZARP. I want to start by chatting a bit about ZARP and stable coins more broadly.
Okay.
For those who are new to the world of crypto, let's start with the basics. What is a stablecoin? What is the objective of a stablecoin?
Okay. So stablecoin is a cryptocurrency like Ethereum or Bitcoin, which I'm sure your viewers will be familiar with. The difference is that its price is pegged to a real-world asset. So the most famous stablecoins are USDT or Tether and USDC, which is issued by a company called Circle in the States, and those track the price of the US dollar. So that's what a stablecoin is. It's a cryptocurrency, but without the price volatility that we used to with assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Okay. So what purpose do they serve?
Multiple purposes. I suppose the most obvious one is just as a general hedge against the volatility of digital assets. So, obviously, I think a lot of people who are holding Bitcoin and Ethereum and other digital assets at the moment see them as more of a speculative instrument and something that will hopefully appreciate in price. And, they've heard the stories of people who got rich overnight, which are almost never true, but undoubtedly a lot of people have made a lot of money just by hanging on to these things. So that's the one use case. The other is then to use as a settlement rails or in payments. So you can send that value around without having to withdraw funds back into the traditional banking system, for example. So that's another use case. Really the sky's the limit from there. What I find exciting is the idea of programmable money, and taking our existing currencies and making them compatible with decentralized finance. You can start building platforms and payment systems and financial instruments, etc., programmatically, and automating processes and settlement, etc., with a kind of money that can be programmed. And I think that's really the great innovation of Bitcoin, is that it introduced the idea of programmable money to the world, or money for the internet, as Mark Andreessen likes to say, because really that was the one protocol that was missing from the internet until Bitcoin came along. When the internet first sprang up, we had TCP/IP as a protocol for sending simple packets of information back and forth, and then hypertext was developed as a protocol for presenting information online and starting to develop content. We had codecs as protocols for transporting voice over the internet, and that enabled telephony and Skype and what we're doing right now, recording this over the internet. So we have this stack of protocols that enable all sorts of applications on the internet. But what we didn't have a protocol for was money. And that, I think, was really the first principles thinking that was behind PayPal, or I think it was called X at first. With Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and the pioneers of PayPal, Rudolf Buerta. There's a South African connection. There always is. Two South African connections.
Owns X.com, in fact.
Oh, does he? Sure, that must be worth a bundle. Yeah. But, that was really the thinking, was that money doesn't have a protocol on the internet, or value, settlement. The financial system is missing protocols. And we took technologies like credit cards, which were invented in the 1950s. I don't think people always realize exactly how old credit card technology is. And we shoehorned them into working online, but they weren't of the internet, and it had disastrous consequences. I mean, credit card fraud took on a whole new level of activity when it met the internet. And so Bitcoin for the first time was going, well, here's a protocol for money. And that's quite a significant thing, because it means that you finally get the internet doing to the financial world what it did to every other industry. We saw what the internet's effect was, on media, on photography, on everything else we do in the world. And now we're seeing it do the same things to the world of finance, because there's a protocol for that now. And so stablecoins come along and go, okay, well, that's great. And Bitcoin is fantastic. Some people would argue it's the best form of money we've ever had. Others would say it's the best store of value we've ever had. There are a lot of interesting discussions to get into around Bitcoin specifically, but stablecoins take all of that good thinking around consensus mechanisms, proof of work or proof of stake, etc., distribution, and apply that to traditional value of currency.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff, and we actually covered a lot of the DeFi, decentralized finance stuff, in the discussion we had with yourself and Stephen those 6 months ago or so. So I'm not going to rehash that in a lot of detail today. But let's talk a little bit more about ZARP, ZARP. Does it stand for something?
Well, as you know, ZAR is sort of the currency ticker for the rand. And P just stands for peg, because our coin is pegged to the price of the rand. So rand peg, sense. I suppose you could think of it as.
Yeah. Do stablecoins have to be pegged to the value of a fiat currency, or can they be pegged to the value of anything?
They can be pegged to the value of anything. I suppose the next obvious question is how. So we've seen cryptocurrencies that are pegged to the price of gold, for example. And traditionally, the way that you peg any currency to another is you have a treasury of the asset that you're trying to peg somewhere. So if you're going to issue a cryptocurrency that's pegged to the price of gold, my first question for you would be, well, where are the gold bars that are backing that value? Why is it worth the price of a gold bar? And so that really is the trick, is are you going to collateralize this with the actual asset that it's pegged to? Or are you going to come up with something more extravagant? And some have, for example. So, the MakerDAO platform has enabled a US dollar stablecoin called DAI. And they do actually have a treasury, but it's more exotic than just dollars in a bank somewhere. It's actually digital assets that are backing the price of DAI. And ironically, if you look at that situation today, it's predominantly USDC, which is got literal cash reserves sitting, with financial institutions in the States that's backing the price of DAI.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could create a stablecoin for the price of anything, and I think that we will in time. So, part of our hypothesis is that in the future you'll see the tokenization of everything. So, today's equities would probably be tokenized. All fiat currencies are already being tokenized. That process is underway. But futures and every financial derivative you can imagine, we're seeing being tokenized in the future using similar sort of principles.
Is that the whole idea behind NFTs, or am I misreading it?
NFTs have a role to play in this all, and I think that's what what many people overlook in the discussion around NFTs or non-fungible tokens. Is I think the perception with a lot of people is that it's just about the art world at the moment, and that it's nerds, swapping pictures of monkeys for for magic internet money. But NFTs go beyond that.
There's more to it than that.
Well, the NFTs have real utility. So beyond the world of art, where they do solve real problems, just around validity of art, etc. It's a certificate of ownership, essentially. But if you look at the world of decentralized finance, NFTs are used on protocols like Uniswap, for example, to represent liquidity positions. So when I bring assets to the Uniswap protocol, which enables a distributed platform for people to swap one asset for another, so I could trade ZARP for Ethereum, for example, on Uniswap. When you add liquidity to those platforms, it's an NFT that's issued and given to you that represents your stake in that liquidity pool. So there's very real utility and very real problems that are being solved with NFTs. And because they're not as sexy as pictures of monkeys and Snoop Dogg rapping at the Video Music Awards, they don't get talked about as much. But NFTs are absolutely part of the setup. The stablecoins themselves, however, use a different standard. Most of them are ERC20 tokens, typically on the Ethereum network. And those more closely resemble Ethereum itself as a token and less as an NFT, which is non-fungible.
Right, tell me a bit more about ZARP. How successful has it been? When was it launched, first of all? How successful has it been? Have you got some stats around how it's being used?
Look, it's early days, Duncan. We launched it roughly a year ago, and given what we wanted to do, which was really come up with the most trusted cryptocurrency project in South Africa, there was a lot of background work that we needed to do just to put things in place. So the first thing we did was work with a local audit group to bring an auditor on board so that we would have independent attestation of our cash reserves from day one. So if I go to market and go, hey, I've got this cryptocurrency that's worth R1, as I alluded to earlier, your first question should be why? Why is it worth R1? And if my answer is because there's R1 in the bank for every token we issue on the blockchain, your next question should be, says who? How do I know that those rands are actually there? Why should I trust you? And those are good questions to ask. And so our answer to the question is we've got independent auditors that verify our cash reserves. So don't believe us. Look at the independent attestation reports that are put out by our auditors, and we're going to keep a trail of those. We're actually working on a new version of our website where you'll be able to go back and view the attestation reports since day one. So it was a bit of a process just to kind of expose auditors to this world. And the obvious thing they need to do as well is they need to compare our cash reserves sitting now with Old Mutual Wealth with the token supply on the blockchain. So we also had to show them, how you use a block explorer to go and verify the token supply. Of course, the beautiful thing about that is anybody can go and verify the token supply. So, with cash reserves, you wouldn't be able to go and ask a financial institution for statements for somebody else's account. But in the case of the ZARP token contract on Ethereum, you can actually use a block explorer like Etherscan, go and look at the contract and see exactly how many tokens we've issued for yourself. Anyway, it was a process to get auditors up to speed, and then also to think about treasury management. Where do our cash reserves sit? Who are the correct partners to do that with? So that's been a process. And then also, working with our legal partners to make sure that from a legal perspective, we're not contravening the Banks Act, that we're aligning with what existing regulation there is. Of course, there's nothing specific to digital assets yet. That's coming soon. But there's more general regulation that we wanted to make sure we were complying with. Do we need to register ourselves with the Financial Intelligence Center? The answer to that question was yes, so we did. So a lot of work was done behind the scenes, bringing on the right partners, setting up the ecosystem, developing the technology. And then we did start rolling that out over the last year. At its height, we had about $3.6 million, or at the time, I think about 67 million rand in ZARP tokens issued. That's reduced substantially recently. I think that has more to do with the macroeconomic environment and the price of the rand in general. I think everybody's long dollars at the moment, so that's reduced substantially. OVEX is our first exchange partner, so they're the first centralized exchange where you can swap actual rand for ZARP and vice versa. They've also got a ZARP savings account that they've introduced to the market, so you can earn a return on holding ZARP with them. We started to inject liquidity into Uniswap and Curve and other decentralized platforms and protocols because we really do think that that's the future. But other than that, it's still early days. So we've got things set up nicely now, and it's time to grow.
And I suppose a lot of learnings along the way, and you're actually holding the hands of regulators as well, because I'm sure they're also learning along the route.
Yes, we've had a few engagements with the Reserve Bank, and there's a good conversation that's forming there. And that's really our view is, we're here to work with the regulators to help kind of shape the environment, and also to kind of think about what this means in the South African context. It's always tempting to look at what's done in other jurisdictions and just assume that we could do the same thing here. But there are all sorts of things, There are nuances around foreign exchange control, for example, in South Africa that don't exist in most countries. And there's, of course, a philosophical discussion to be had, and one that Mark Shuttleworth has made more than philosophy when it comes to whether or not we should have foreign exchange control at all. But for better or for worse, it's here, so we have to deal with it and think about that too. So really, we part of the sorry.
How does foreign exchange control affect ZARP?
Well, it doesn't really from our perspective, because we don't allow foreign entities to transact via us at all. So we won't onboard a foreign institution to issue ZARP, for example. There's no reason why foreign entities shouldn't be able to access our token on the blockchain if they're outside of the jurisdiction. But there's some more general questions being asked in cryptocurrency outside of just stablecoins in terms of foreign exchange control. Again, the Foreign Exchange Control Act is a fairly old piece of policy. It comes from the apartheid years in South Africa. Not all of it makes a large amount of sense, to be honest. So, for example, according to the Foreign Exchange Controls Act, it's illegal for a South African to leave the country with more than 600 rand in clothing on them. So we've probably all broken it inadvertently. But anyway, so I think you'd probably be familiar, and your viewers would be familiar with the idea of a single discretionary allowance, or the idea that South Africans may only take up to R1 million of value outside of the country in any given tax year. If you want to do more than that, you need to apply for special permission from SARS. So all of that is part of foreign exchange control. And then the obvious question is, well, if I'm buying cryptocurrencies, does that affect foreign exchange control? It shouldn't. If I'm, just a South African doing it on Luno in South Africa, for example, what happens if I send that Bitcoin to somebody in Japan then? Because now there's value leaving the country. And if you do that via the traditional banking system, you have to file what's referred to as a BOP report with the Reserve Bank, to give them the heads up that you're sending money outside of the country, or get the correct permissions depending on what the setup is. But of course, on the internet and on the blockchain, borders are imaginary things. They don't exist to the Bitcoin network. But the Bitcoin is going to treat us the same whether I'm sending the cash to somebody sitting in the same room as me or on the other side of the planet. So there's the obvious question of, well, A, do these policies still make sense? Whether or not they ever did is another question. But that's the first obvious question. And then B is, supposing that you should be doing something about foreign exchange control, can you? Because how are you going to police this? You've got this activity happening on the internet. I presume most South Africans who are transacting in cryptocurrency don't even know that foreign exchange control exists and aren't familiar with the policies. So they're inadvertently potentially breaking laws that they have no knowledge of. So it's an interesting kettle of fish, and one we need to swim in quite carefully. But we're here to play ball with the regulators and make sure that we do the right thing. So lots of interesting discussions.
Certainly the Reserve Bank gets a lot of praise for the way it manages monetary policy in South Africa and the way it's managing interest rates at the moment, for example, in an inflationary environment. But do you think they're doing the right stuff around crypto? Do you think they're keeping up with what's happening? Do you think they're moving quickly enough?
I've been very impressed with the Reserve Bank and more specifically the Intergovernmental FinTech Working Group that's running, representing all of the various financial authorities in South Africa, so the FSCA and PASA for payments and etc. Most recently the Intergovernmental FinTech Working Group put out a position paper just really outlining their understanding of cryptocurrency or digital assets and where they think the concerns are. So they've come up with this term, which is being used in some other jurisdictions as well, of a crypto asset service provider, which similarly to a financial services provider will eventually have bespoke regulation and will have to comply with certain things. Companies that are deemed CASPs are already being assumed as accountable institutions, which means they need to be registered with the Financial Intelligence Center for suspicious transaction monitoring, something we wholeheartedly support, of course. We don't want criminal activity on our networks, and we want to help mitigate it as far as possible. So I actually, I think the working group has done a fantastic job of understanding the space, appreciating that they don't want to stifle innovation and they want to enable this in South Africa, and producing a formidable position paper on it. And really understanding the lay of the land. And now it's the job of the regulators to actually implement licensing regimes, etc., that make sense in the context of that position paper. So, yes, I've been very impressed with the work done so far. Good.
Now, you made an announcement, I think it was a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, that you are now working with Old Mutual Wealth. Not Weath, as I accidentally called them on the website. And they're now acting as the treasury for ZARP, is that right?
So they're managing our cash reserves, and we're very proud of that. Old Mutual Wealth, of course, is the country's oldest trust company. And they have it's actually specifically a division of Old Mutual Wealth that does treasury advisory services, as they call it. And really, having them looking after our cash reserves puts us in a great position, and I think also lends us some credibility as well, because you've got Old Mutual happily for us to speak publicly about the fact that they're involved in the project and looking after our cash reserves. So, yeah, very proud of that announcement, and I've loved our engagement with the Old Mutual Wealth team. They really are on the ball. They're thinking about where the world is going and the world of money is going, and it's been very good for us so far.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Now, I have to ask you this in light of what happened earlier this year with was it Terra Luna or Terra USD? What was the name of the stablecoin?
So Terra Luna was the network, and UST was the stablecoin on the Terra Luna network.
UST. Okay.
Yes.
So that collapsed. So I have to ask the question, how safe are stablecoins?
Well, again, not all stablecoins are created equally. It's sort of like asking how safe are stocks. And, theoretically, very safe, but you're still going to have a Steinhoff every now and then. And Terra Luna was sort of the Steinhoff of the crypto world. Because it without getting into too many details, it was basically a giant Ponzi scheme that came apart.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, there was nothing backing the value really, and they had created a protocol called Anchor that you could lock your UST into and present it as collateral for loans, etc. And you could earn 19% as a return on 19% per annum, or APY as we say. On whatever you had locked in the protocol. And then the obvious question is, well, where's this 19% coming from? And if you're just creating tokens out of thin air and giving it back to people, what's the value? And, as with all great Ponzi's, it just relies on new people coming in all the time and falling for it. Anyway, it was not to be, but it was also predictably not to be.
How much damage did it do, though, to investor confidence?
I think to people not paying too much attention or just generally not understanding what's happening in the world of cryptocurrency, it did irreparable damage for many. I think it made a lot of regulators sit up and take attention, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But other than that, I saw a lot of positives come from it as well, because it really showed how resilient the real projects are, the real stable coins are. You look at USDC, for example, which to us is the gold standard of stable coins, and it didn't affect the price at all, hardly shifted. USDC was worth $1 before, during, and after the Terra Luna collapse. And then there were sort of shockwaves that went out through the industry. And that combined with general macro economic environment and inflation rates running amok, etc., wars in Europe, and everything else that was negatively impacting markets, sort of brought down a lot of crypto projects and companies. So you may have heard of Celsius, which was one company, yes. One emperor that had no clothes, and there was Three Arrows Capital. And a whole bunch of others that when the waves went out, we saw them standing on the beach without their swimming costumes on. And that was bad for them, but it meant that the good guys who were left standing had some validity for what they were doing. And what I especially enjoyed was, if you look at the decentralized finance protocols, Compound, Aave, all of the blue chips, didn't affect them at all. And showed the value of having fully collateralized loan markets in transparent protocols that anybody can go and query. I think it also made it obvious that when it comes to protocols, we don't need regulation. There's nobody to protect, and there's nothing to protect them from. It's a protocol, it's a tool. And yes, some people will misuse it, etc. But they're fully collateralized. The code is on the blockchain. It's public for anybody to go and view, as are the collateral reserves. So you can go and see if Compound claims to have X amount of Ethereum locked into a collateral pool. You can go and verify that for yourself. So really these protocol-driven sort of blue-chip DeFi products, if you will, this all really just made them look even better than they did before, from my perspective.
Should consumers simply stay away from stablecoins that aren't backed one-to-one in treasury vaults?
I'm not about to begin to tell people what to do. I mean, I would say generally with cryptocurrency, you shouldn't have any money in it that you're not willing to lose as a principle. But yes, instead of just telling them to stay away, I'd say just ask the obvious questions. If somebody's telling you something that sounds too good to be true, then it almost definitely is. And if somebody's claiming that what they're doing has value, ask them why, and then look at how you can verify that. Again, those obvious questions. If it's worth R1, how? And if you're claiming to have money in the bank, how can I believe you? Why should I believe you? Is there an independent auditor who agrees with you? Does everything make sense? If you've got 5 million rand in the bank and you've got 1 billion tokens issued, why? Where are the other 995 million? And what are you doing with them? So just ask the obvious questions, I suppose. Generally, I think we're learning that the only way to really run a stable coin is to fully collateralize it. Cash reserves are the obvious way to do it. It's a very honest way to do it. Ironically, that's not how the traditional financial world works, because banks in the traditional financial world don't have to collateralize anything. They run what are referred to as fractional reserves. And in some countries, that can be less than 5% of the money they claim to have on their books. Just something to think about.
Why when there's a run on banks, you often see banks falling over quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously more complicated than that, because you've got government who represents the lender of last resort, and theoretically the system should have enough money to help a bank recover from a run on the bank. But in our world, the more collateral, the better. And so with ZARP, we actually aim to be over-collateralized. So if we're doing our job properly in the future, we hope to have more than R1 in the bank for every ZARP token out there. We want to be over-collateralized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when do you start working? You're working with OVEX at the moment. Do you start to work with other crypto exchanges at some point as well?
We're in discussions with many of them. Unfortunately, the way that the exchange world has evolved means that, especially globally, a lot of exchanges want you to pay them to list your token, which we just principally will not do. Yeah. Okay. So it means that we have to be a little bit smarter about how we do things. We can't just throw money at the problem, and we don't think that we should have to. And It's early days, so we're sort of aware of that too, and the fact that we kind of need to earn our place on the exchanges. But to be honest, as I said earlier, so much of that activity is moving on chain and into decentralized finance that I'm not sure it'll matter in time. I mean, if you've had any experience using protocols like Uniswap or Balancer, especially on layer 2 chains or roll-ups like Arbitrum, they're fast, they're cheap, they're efficient. You don't have to ask anybody for permission. You shouldn't have to. You've already KYC to get your money into the system, and now it's in that system, and you can do stuff with it. They're programmable, so they can be built into other applications more efficiently. So we're really building for the future of decentralized finance, and that's our primary focus.
Fascinating stuff. So if I want to buy some ZARP, how do I go about it? Do I go to OVEX? Is that my only choice? Can I buy it somewhere else?
It's your best choice is to go to OVEX. We're not doing minting or burning with retail clients just yet. So you need to work through an OVEX for now. There are a lot of projects that will make ZARP available in other ways, and very interestingly, that are on their way. Unfortunately, I can't talk about any of them just yet. I'm under NDA with most of them. But we're having a lot of very interesting discussions that I'm looking forward to sharing with you over the next year or two.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Now, excuse me if this is an ignorant question, but right now, if I wanted to, I could go and mine a Bitcoin and create my own Bitcoin. I might not be able to do it profitably, but I can do it. Can you do the same thing with stable coins?
No. So, if anybody could go and impact the supply of the stablecoin, it would be very difficult to manage the underlying cash reserves to make sure that you're fully collateralized. Right. So mining doesn't exist in our world. There are various strategies that stablecoin projects adopt. We think the most honest way to do it is to be constantly burning and minting a supply of ZARP to match our cash reserves. What does that mean? Well, minting just means creating new tokens. So it's a function of our smart contract. We are the only entity that can do that because we hold the private keys that enable us to issue new ZARP. And then conversely, burning is destroying tokens. So if somebody withdraws RAND from us, they have to send us the ZARP tokens that represent that RAND value, and we actually then destroy those tokens. So, every now and then we'll rebalance the token supply according to the cash reserves, and we'll make sure that they, as far as possible, are always matching. And then our auditors will go and verify that. But that does mean that mining doesn't exist directly for ZARP. ZARP, of course, does go through mining pools because the Ethereum network is constantly being mined, and that's how transactions are being verified. And ZARP is part of that set of protocols, but not for token generation.
Okay, fascinating. Well, you just mentioned Ethereum, and I want to switch the conversation in a different direction now and talk about the merge, which is this move from proof of work to proof of stake, which took place last week, I think it was. And before it happened, there were a lot of people saying this could go spectacularly wrong. This is a software project. It could fail hopelessly. It could be a disaster. It came along, it happened, and nothing happened, really. We moved from proof of work to proof of stake. Firstly, what is proof of work? What is proof of stake? Why was the merge important, and why did the guys behind Ethereum do it?
Sure. There's a lot to the answer. So, okay, let's start with proof of work, because that was an idea that was introduced to the world by Satoshi Nakamoto, who's the pseudonymous inventor of Bitcoin. And really, it's a consensus mechanism. It's a way for computers to prove that they've done something. And the reason you needed proof of work was to enable settlement on the Bitcoin network without relying on trusted third parties. And that's absolutely fundamental, because it means that I can send Bitcoin from my wallet to your wallet, Duncan, and we don't need any intermediaries. We don't need any middlemen. We don't need a bank. We don't need somebody to verify the transaction, because that verification is happening in the network itself. So proof of work enables what we refer to as a trustless network, where we can transact peer-to-peer directly. So that's the basic idea. It's also the reason why you shouldn't be listening to anybody telling you you need your own blockchain or a centralized blockchain. Because the moment you're introducing a central authority into a blockchain, you're negating all of that proof of work overhead. So you're just wasting compute resources now and achieving nothing, because you've got a trusted third party that's required in the equation. So sorry to all of the management consultants telling their clients that they should build their own blockchain, but it just conceptually makes no sense. So that's proof of work. And without getting into the details of it, which I could carry on about all day because I'm obsessed with with the stuff, as you can tell, it works, and it works very well in the context of Bitcoin. Proof of stake is similar, but has some fundamental differences. And the biggest one is that in proof of work, you're proving that you've done something. And you're doing something by applying compute cycles to a protocol. And that requires quite a lot of resources in terms of compute to actually hash through these algorithms and produce an answer to a conundrum of sorts. With proof of stake, you kind of work around the need for all of that compute resource by instead paying for the right to process transactions up front. So you're locking a stake into the network that's buying you a seat as a miner, if you will, to process transactions, or what are referred to as validators in the Ethereum world. Other than that, practically it works very similarly. There is a concern that seems to reside mostly in the mind of Bitcoin maximalists, as we call them, that proof of stake tends more towards centralization and to regulatory capture of the Ethereum blockchain. Both of those ideas are nonsense and are not playing out in reality so far. I'll get a lot of angry tweets again for saying this, but I'm not afraid to because it's just true. But what we're actually seeing in practice is that proof of stake actually is tending towards more distribution, and we can get into the reasons for that if you'd like. But for the same reason, a lot of people accuse the Bitcoin network of being centralized around some big mining pools, which used to predominantly be in China. And that's true. There are, 5 mining pools that represent most of the mining activity on the Bitcoin network. But each of those pools is constituted by, tens of thousands of individual miners that are fully distributed and can switch their hashing to another pool at the drop of a hat. So it's lazy to say that Bitcoin mining is centralized. Once you understand what that means, it just isn't. It's equally lazy to say that proof of stake is centralized around the big validators, because if you look at the biggest validation pools like Lido, for example, Lido is also an aggregate of many independent miners that are just pooling their activity into that single pool, and can also switch out of that pool and can validate on their own or for somebody else as easily, if not more easily, than you can in proof of work. So proof of stake is decentralized. The environmental impact is an interesting thing we might get into because there's a lot of nonsense in that discussion as well. But the reality is that...
Let's talk about it now, because one of the biggest benefits of this merge has been that the energy consumption from the Ethereum network has dropped, I believe, by over 99%, that it was
Yes.
using the energy equivalent to a country the size of the Netherlands. Is that true?
The media, I always hate saying the media because there's nothing wrong with the media, but there have been some terrible headlines around this. And of course, the more extreme the headline, the more clicks you get. So in the worst case scenario, you've gotten some journalists who've gotten it completely wrong, and they think that one Bitcoin transaction uses as much electricity as a household in North America. Just nonsense. And they're conflating blocks of transactions with singular transactions. And it's very curious because some of them definitely know better. But anyway, let's not get into the conspiracy side of it. But let's talk about the reality. So firstly, Bitcoin does use a lot of electricity. It absolutely does. Anything done at scale by human beings requires large amounts of resources. And things that use electricity are nothing new. So how big is Bitcoin's consumption? You could compare it to a small country, but if you compare it to other things human beings do, Bitcoin uses less electricity than all of the world's tumble dryers, for example. So tumble dryers are massively useful. I'm not suggesting that people shouldn't use them, but there are other options. You don't have to use an appliance to dry your clothes. You can also just hang it on the washing line, and nature will do its thing. And you'll save the world a lot of electricity. So if we just all stopped tumble drying our clothes, we'd save more electricity than Bitcoin uses. Another activity that uses more electricity than the Bitcoin network is Christmas lights in North America alone. So all the Christmas lights that go up every festive season in North America, those, and again, I'm not detracting from their value. I love walking through an American city, during Christmas. It's beautiful. But we could save more electricity than the Bitcoin network if we stopped doing that too. Now, you can carry on with these comparisons all day. YouTube uses roughly, depending who you speak to, somewhere between 25 and 200 times the electricity that the Bitcoin network does. The real question is, what are you getting in exchange for those resources? And of course, with Bitcoin, you get one of the best settlement networks ever designed. I think anybody arguing against the utility of Bitcoin just honestly hasn't taken the time to research it enough at this point. So we do get something for that value. And of course, at some stage, you have to talk about the thing that Bitcoin was designed to replace, because the traditional financial system uses an inordinate amount of resources. It might not be electricity directly, although it would be interesting to know exactly how much electricity is consumed by bank branches and ATMs every year. But we'll never figure that out. It's theoretical. But if you look at resources more generally, and especially executive salaries at large banks, where they have thousands of people earning massive salaries, driving big cars, flying in private jets, owning holiday homes, that resource consumption is also massive. So do those people deserve it or not? That's not for me to say. It's just interesting that of all the things one could accuse the Bitcoin network of, Bitcoin's critics have chosen what's arguably the most lazy response to the whole thing. What's fascinating, though, is that there's a growing amount of research that's building up about Bitcoin actually being environmentally friendly, because it gives us ways of curtailing excess power generation, and doing things like methane capture that there's now an economic incentive for. So a lot of methane leaks into the atmosphere from various things. And again, I'm not an expert on climate change or the science here, so take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt. But if you can capture that methane, then there are various ways to do that. You now have an economic incentive to do that, because if you turn that into electricity and use it to mine Bitcoin, you've basically got a money battery, if you will, and you can store the value from that activity. Another great example is with what's referred to as flaring. So, in places like North America especially, you've got these gas production plants generating electricity from gas that's being released from the ground due to fracking. Now, again, I don't want to get into the philosophical discussion or the ethical discussion around fracking and whether or not that should have happened, but it has. And those power plants actually produce too much gas is produced for those plants. And so what they do with the excess gas, or what they used to do, was literally set it on fire, right? So environmentally terrible, just burning all the extra gas coming out of the ground. Now you could actually generate from that excess gas stored in the form of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is actually saving the environment in a lot of ways. So it's a fascinating discussion. As always, it's more complicated than most people assume. But yes, proof of stake does use less electricity, for better or for worse. Again, you're swapping that for having to have 32 Ethereum up front, because to buy your stake to run a single validator on the Ethereum network, you need 32 ETH, which is, that's a lot of money. So God giveth and God taketh away, and there's only so much one can do about where the resources come from and where they go. But from a purely hardware perspective, you can now run an Ethereum validator on something as simple as a Raspberry Pi that'll cost you a few $100. You will need quite a large hard drive to plug into it to store the blockchain, because the Ethereum blockchain is massive. You don't need the whole blockchain anymore, and you can do it with cheaper hardware, etc. But yes, that's it in a nutshell.
Fascinating. So just explain to me then why the developers behind Ethereum decided to move from proof of work to proof of stake.
So there were a few reasons for the decision. The one is to quite honestly, to drive distribution, because all of the Ethereum mining before this was done predominantly using graphics cards for the hashing. Ethereum is what we call ASIC resistant, and ASIC are application-specific integrated circuits, or computers designed to do just one thing. So in Bitcoin mining, that's dominated now by ASICs, because they hash more efficiently on this particular algorithm. So SHA-256 in the case of Bitcoin, more efficiently than even the most expensive graphics cards or GPUs. Ethereum decided strategically to be ASIC resistant, to encourage more generic hashing using more generic hardware, which means that GPUs are used predominantly for Ethereum. And that's fine, but it doesn't scale spectacularly well. GPUs are expensive. The world has chip shortages, etc. Gamers think that Ethereum miners are robbing them of their new GPUs, whereas that's more complicated than that as well. But we won't get into that discussion. So just general efficiency, scalability, distribution, but also it's a way to bring down fees and make the Ethereum network more efficient, because proof of stake is more efficient. And that, combined with a lot of other standards that have been introduced both before the merge and coming after the merge, will just generally make Ethereum more efficient, and hopefully bring down gas fees on the network.
Now, what are gas fees?
So gas fees are basically transaction fees. It's the money you pay for submitting a transaction to the Ethereum network. Gas is calculated in a unit called GWEI, GWEI, which represents 1/18 of an Ethereum token. And that rate is variable depending on how much activity there is on the network. So you're basically paying for priority in having your transaction processed. So if you're willing to pay more gas, your transaction will be processed more quickly, because the miners are going to, now the validators are going to prioritize the transactions that they earn the highest transaction fee from. So that's how gas works in a nutshell. And gas on the Ethereum network is paid in Ethereum itself. So you have to have a little bit of gas in the tank of Ethereum in your wallet before you can do anything else. There are new standards coming along, EIPs as we refer to them, that'll change that, where you can actually pay in the token you're sending, etc. And then, of course, there are so many new blockchains and out there that compete with Ethereum and have various ways of thinking about this and doing it entirely differently for some of them.
So, Simon, I've been reading quite a bit about something called the flippening happening, possibly at some point on the back of the merge, where the Ethereum market cap flips with Bitcoins and Ethereum becomes the most valuable cryptocurrency. Do you think that's a possibility?
It's definitely possible. I'm not sure whether or not it'll happen. There's I can't remember who originally said it, but there's sort of a mantra in the Ethereum community that Bitcoin was the idea and Ethereum's the execution. Now, when I say the Ethereum community, I tend to be more agnostic about these things. So, with my company, with ZARP, the first chain we deployed on was Ethereum, but we're also deployed on Phantom. We're looking at Solana. And I'm most excited about the Bitcoin Lightning Network, because there's a new protocol for Lightning that enables stablecoins on the Lightning Network, and ZARP will be there when that's ready. So we have a multi-chain strategy. So I do not have a horse in this race, but I am a Bitcoiner. I consider myself to be one, and I've been working with Bitcoin since 2011. So it's been interesting watching this conversation take shape and evolve over the years. And I think, we need to remember that Ethereum was announced at a Bitcoin conference. That's where the world first heard about Ethereum. And Bitcoiners were very excited about Ethereum in the beginning. I was, and we thought it was a fantastic project. And we certainly didn't see this as a zero-sum game, or we didn't see Bitcoin and Ethereum as mutually exclusive. We just saw this as good for the entire community and ecosystem. So that's very much where I come from. I consider myself to be an original Bitcoiner. Unfortunately, a lot of Bitcoiners have taken on a cult-like appreciation of this magic internet money that they discovered yesterday. And there's this weird ideological alignment with a lot of them. So, being pretty extreme in their libertarian views comes with it, whereas, one can't argue that the early Bitcoiners weren't libertarian, but I think they were more moderate about it, to be quite honest. And one could get into the cypherpunk movement, etc., but be that as it may. And then there's also all sorts of other curiosities around eating red meat, and there seems to be a Christian ideological slant to a lot of this as well. But by any parameter I look at it, it's starting to resemble a cult. The Bitcoin maximalists, it's our idea good, your idea bad. We only eat this. We only do. It's very weird, and I want no part of it. Yeah, it is a bit bizarre. But so obviously, if you speak to those people who also consider themselves to be Bitcoiners, they'll tell you that the flippening will never happen and that Ethereum is what they call a shitcoin. I'm not sure if I can say that on your show. You can bleep it out. But anything that's not Bitcoin is evil, and Ethereum is the most evil. Complete nonsense, of course. Why could Ethereum flip Bitcoin? Well, Ethereum transfers more value than Bitcoin does already. That's just a fact. Because Ethereum has a system for smart contracts, there are a lot of things represented on the Ethereum network alone. So stablecoins are one of them. There are no stablecoins on Bitcoin because there can't be. We used to have an idea referred to as colored coins in the early day of Bitcoin that could have theoretically enabled something like a stablecoin. Unfortunately, Bitcoin moved away from that idea pretty quickly. But, stablecoins, loan markets, other tokens, whether it's Shiba Inu, and we can argue about how valid they are and whether or not they should have any value, but some of them undoubtedly do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that as part of the merge and with EIPs before it, Ethereum has become deflationary. So there's a lot of discussion in the crypto community and elsewhere around monetary supply, if you will, and whether inflation is good or bad or deflation. Of course, Bitcoin has a finite supply and it's deflationary from that perspective. So there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, and of course they're divisible by sats or 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, etc. We can shift decimals, but by the time the last Bitcoin is mined, there'll only be 21 million of them. Never more, never less. When Ethereum first got going, its supply was metered monthly, but was theoretically infinite, and that's changed fundamentally now. So the supply of Ethereum is actually being reduced now. And the way that's being done is every time you pay gas fees or transaction fees on the Ethereum network, a percentage of those fees are destroyed or burned. The tokens from them are taken out of the network. So as more and more people use Ethereum, its supply is actually decreasing now, and Ethereum is hyper deflationary, if you will, from that perspective.
Okay.
Now, again, it's very hard to say whether or not that's a good or bad thing. Theoretically, we can discuss it. Time will tell. But it does mean that, if demand does its thing on Ethereum the way that it has over the last, whatever years since Ethereum first hit the ground in 2016, then eventually you can imagine Ethereum's value overtaking Bitcoin's. But of course, it depends what happens in the Bitcoin world, because we're starting to see retail investors, institutional investors get into Bitcoin in a more formidable way. We're seeing retirement funds starting to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet. They're not doing that with Ethereum. So Bitcoin's value is also going to build up. And this is an interesting time to be having that discussion, because cryptocurrency is in another lull with the rest of the market. It's crashed again for the 9 billionth time since I started looking at it. So I think a lot of people don't think of this as appreciating in value in any way, but it will again. And so I don't have a strong opinion on how desirable the flippening is or whether or not it will happen, but it certainly is possible.
Simon, before I let you go, over the next 12 months, what are you watching for in crypto? What are you most excited about? What's coming next?
There's just so much happening. So one of the interesting things I've been looking at is the idea of soul-bound tokens. I'm not sure if you've heard of these, but this is the next evolution after NFTs, is a token that not only is not fungible, but actually can't be sent from one wallet to another at all. So once it's in your Ethereum wallet, it's locked there, and it can only ever be in your Ethereum wallet. Now that's interesting for a number of potential use cases. One of them could be a university degree, for example. Another could be a national identity in time. Or maybe there's a passport token that's locked into Duncan's wallet and only Duncan's wallet. And of course, there are challenges that come with that, because what if Duncan loses his keys and somebody else gets access to his wallet or hacks it? And there are a lot of interesting potential solutions to that. One of them is social recovery, where you could have a number of other keys which may be held by your friends, family, lawyer, etc., that could then recover your soul-bound tokens or reassign ownership, etc. So lots of interesting discussions happening in that space at the moment, very philosophical. But, really, I think what I love about technology in general is just that you never know what to expect. You never know what's going to happen. I love that quote that's attributed to Bill Gates with, we always overestimate the change that will happen in 2 years and underestimate what will actually happen in 10. And I think back to the days of us being technology journalists, watching Steve Jobs announce the iPhone on stage in 2007, which still feels like yesterday to me, Duncan. I don't know about you, showing our age, perhaps. But I think we were all enamored with this new toy that Apple had given the world. And of course, they weren't alone. There were companies like BlackBerry doing amazing things in that department, and Nokia. But nobody had an idea where smartphones were going in 10 years' time, The things we're doing with our phones today, I mean, I didn't see Instagram coming. I didn't see Uber coming, Google Maps. It's just being a primary photography device, etc. There's just so much that's come with the smartphone that nobody expected. So when I first got into Bitcoin in 2011, who had any idea, firstly, that it would reach the heights that it has in terms of value? That's never really mattered to me much. But, NFTs and all of the other things that we're doing, ICOs, etc., I had no idea that any of that was going to happen. Stablecoins, I mean, we kind of thought about it with the colored coin notion, but yeah, it's taken on a life of its own. And so I suppose 1 year is easier to think about. But I'm more just looking forward to finding out what comes next and acknowledging that I probably don't know what it is.
Well, Simon, we could chat all afternoon about cryptocurrencies and where tech is going. And I think we need to invite you back on the show on a fairly regular basis, actually, to talk about everything that's happening in the crypto space. Maybe we can
anytime.
6 months or so.
Anytime.
On what's happening. But always good to talk to you, Simon. Thanks for making the time, and best of luck with all your ventures and with ZARP. I look forward to seeing how that grows in the years ahead. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Duncan, and congrats on the show. I think it's a great addition to the landscape in South Africa and something that was missing from my podcatcher. So I'm looking forward to seeing where you go with it.
Well, thank you very much, and
cool.
all the best.
Thanks, Duncan. Bye-bye.